Rain pelted the windshield, each drop blurring the road ahead like smeared ink. But Jason didn't care. He loved late night drives, the kind where the world felt empty except for the hum of the engine and the occasional echo of a distant car horn. That night, he was chasing freedom, or maybe he was running from something he didn't even want to name. It started on a deserted stretch of highway in rural Arizona, where the desert's emptiness seemed to press in from every side. He had planned a solo trip to clear his mind, but now, with the storm swelling in intensity, the solitude felt suffocating. The road twisted in ways that didn't make sense, and the GPS seemed to hesitate, recalculating endlessly as if it, too, were confused. Jason's headlights caught movement ahead, a figure standing in the middle of the road. He slammed the brakes, tires screeching against wet asphalt. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, just stood there. At first, Jason thought it was a hitchhiker, but something was off. The way it was hunched, almost crawling, made his stomach knot with dread. He rolled down the window, fogging up the glass with his breath. "Hey, you okay?" No answer. The figure didn't even blink. Jason's pulse spiked. Every instinct screamed at him to leave, but part of him, a darker, curious part, wanted to know what was going on. Lightning struck, illuminating the figure fully for a moment, and Jason froze. It wasn't human. Its arms were too long, dragging on the ground, and its face, what little he could see, was twisted in a grin that no living person could hold. And then it spoke, though no sound came through the storm. Not really. He felt it inside his head. "You shouldn't have come." Jason slammed the accelerator and spun off the road onto a dirt track. The engine roared, tires flinging mud into the night, but the figure followed, gliding over the terrain like water over stones. Every turn he took, every swerve, it was there, just behind him, growing, stretching, waiting. Panic clawed at his chest. The GPS now showed roads that didn't exist, looping him in circles. The radio flickered to life, crackling with static until voices emerged, not normal voices, but whispers repeating his name, calling him forward, calling him to stop. And then, just as suddenly, silence. The storm seemed to pause, the desert holding its breath. He saw an abandoned gas station up ahead, its lights flickering weakly. Jason skidded to a stop, heart hammering. He bolted inside, slamming the door, panting, drenched, and trying to convince himself it was a prank of his mind, the storm, or exhaustion. But as he turned toward the counter, he noticed the figure had slipped inside too, not through the door, through the shadows themselves. It stood there, the grin wider, impossibly wide, and raised a hand. "You shouldn't be here," it hissed, the whisper now audible, echoing off the cracked tiles. Jason tried to run, but the floor seemed to stretch, elongating under his feet, slowing him. The door was gone, replaced by an endless black corridor. He screamed, but no sound emerged. The last thing Jason remembered before he blacked out was the feeling of being watched, a presence behind every reflection, in every shadow. Hours, or was it days? Later, he woke to find the gas station empty, the storm gone, and no sign of the figure. But his phone, abandoned on the counter, displayed a photo. Him, asleep behind the wheel of his car, taken from inside the vehicle, even though no one was there. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind whistles just right through the desert canyons, Jason swears he hears footsteps behind his car, keeping pace, even though he is miles from civilization. Marissa always loved exploring abandoned places. The thrill of wandering through buildings frozen in time gave her a rush no amusement park could match. That weekend, she and two friends decided to investigate the old Fairview Asylum, a crumbling structure rumored to be haunted for decades. The locals avoided it, whispering about patients who vanished without a trace and doctors whose methods were unspeakable. The sun was dipping behind the horizon as they approached, painting the sky in streaks of blood, red and deep violet. The asylum loomed over them, its broken windows like dark, hollow eyes staring down at the trespassers. Marissa felt a twinge of unease, but she pushed it aside. Curiosity always outweighed caution. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the wooden floors creaked under their weight. Every shadow seemed alive, stretching unnaturally, almost following them. They whispered as they moved, using flashlights to pierce the darkness. The walls were adorned with peeling paint, and faded murals of patients playing in the yard added a grotesque charm to the decay. At first, nothing happened. Laughter, shuffling feet, and the distant sound of dripping water were the only companions. But as they reached the upper floors, the temperature dropped sharply. Their breath fogged in the beam of their flashlights. Marissa felt it before she saw it, a presence, pressing against the small of her back, cold and heavy. She spun around, nothing. Then came the whispering, faint at first, like the rustle of paper, then growing louder. "Leave now." Her friends froze, exchanging nervous glances. One of them, Alex, joked to mask his fear, probably just the wind or rats. Marissa didn't laugh. The voice was too deliberate. They pressed onward, curiosity dragging them into the heart of the asylum. In one of the patient rooms, Marissa noticed a journal lying on the floor, its pages yellowed and brittle. She flipped it open, skimming the entries. They chronicled the last days of a patient named Evelyn, detailing strange visions, whispers in the night, and a shadow that seemed to watch her from every corner. The final entry was just one sentence: "It knows my name." A sudden bang echoed through the hall, like a door slamming shut. Their flashlights flickered and died, plunging them into near darkness. Marissa's heart pounded. She felt the brush of cold fingers against her shoulder and spun around. Nothing again. Her voice caught in her throat as a cold breath grazed her ear. "Evelyn," it hissed, and the lights snapped back on. The room was empty except for the journal, now open to a new page. Written in fresh ink, the words chilled her to the bone, "And now you belong to me." She dropped it, and it fluttered to the floor as if blown by an unseen wind. Panic surged. "We're leaving," she said, voice trembling, but the asylum seemed to have other plans. The hallways twisted in impossible ways, doors leading to rooms that didn't exist before, windows showing nothing but darkness outside. Every turn led them deeper into the building, as if the structure itself were alive, guiding them into its heart. Footsteps echoed around them, not theirs, a rhythm that matched their racing pulse. Shadows flitted across the walls, forming shapes that were almost human, but not quite. Marissa tried to stay rational, telling herself fear was amplifying their imagination. But rationality didn't explain the whispers calling each of their names, one after the other, echoing from all directions at once. Suddenly, Alex screamed. They turned to see him staring at a figure emerging from the wall, a woman in a tattered hospital gown, face pale and eyes hollow, moving with a jerky, unnatural gait. Her mouth opened impossibly wide, and the whispers coalesced into a single, horrifying voice. "You can't leave." Marissa grabbed her friends, trying to run, but the floors groaned and buckled beneath them. Hallways stretched endlessly, doors led nowhere, and the shadows seemed to reach out, curling around their ankles, pulling them back. Each step was agony, as if the asylum itself was dragging them deeper, ensuring they could never escape. Then a door opened to what looked like the old operating theater. Surgical tools hung from the ceiling, catching the faint light. In the center, a chair faced them, restraints dangling loosely. The figure of Evelyn, or what she had become, stood there waiting, beckoning with a skeletal hand. "Sit, stay." Her voice was both whisper and scream, echoing inside their skulls. Marissa stumbled back, nearly tripping over the threshold, when she noticed scratches on the wall's names, dates, perhaps the doomed who came before. Among them, written in jagged letters, was her own name. Heart in her throat, she realized the whispers weren't warnings, they were invitations, drawing her in, marking her as the next victim. Somehow, she found the strength to pull Alex and her other friend toward the exit. The asylum didn't resist, not at first, but the hallways warped again, walls closing in, ceilings bending, as if trying to squeeze them into oblivion. They broke into a sprint, guided by sheer instinct, hearts slamming against ribs, lungs burning. At last the front doors appeared. Marissa threw them open and tumbled into the night, rain washing over her, grounding her in the real world. Alex and her friend followed, gasping, soaked and why, died. They didn't speak, didn't look back, didn't breathe properly for several minutes. When they finally dared to glance at the asylum, it looked abandoned, normal, nothing threatening. Yet each of them knew felt deep in their bones that the building hadn't released them. The whispers would follow, names would be remembered, shadows would linger. Marissa never returned to abandoned buildings. She avoids dark corridors, flickering lights, and even reading about haunted places. But sometimes, late at night, when the rain taps lightly against the window, she hears it, faint whispers echoing from somewhere she cannot reach, Marissa, and in that moment she remembers the asylum waiting, patient, eternal. Ryan had always been a skeptic when it came to the supernatural. Ghost stories, haunted houses, paranormal documentaries, he considered them all elaborate fiction. But a chance encounter one rainy evening in rural Oregon changed that perspective forever. He was driving back from a late night shift at the local hospital when the rain became relentless. Visibility was near zero, and the rhythmic patter against the windshield created a hypnotic trance. That's when he saw her, a woman in a tattered white dress, standing in the middle of the road. Her hair clung to her face, soaked, and her posture was rigid, unnatural. Ryan slammed on the brakes, skidding to a halt just a few feet from her. He honked, flashed his lights, but she didn't move. Fear prickled at the edges of his mind. He leaned out of the window, calling out, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" No response, just the rain falling around her, her white dress blending with the mist. Ryan considered driving around her, but then realized she had no reflection in the wet asphalt. That stopped him cold. His rational mind screamed to leave, yet an inexplicable pull kept him there. As he stepped out of the car, the air seemed to thicken. His every instinct urged retreat, but curiosity overpowered caution. The woman slowly lifted her head, her eyes dark, endless voids locked onto his. In that moment, Ryan felt every cell in his body freeze, as if her gaze had pierced into his soul. Then came the whispers. Faint at first, indistinguishable from the rain. "Leave, don't follow," they murmured. But as the seconds passed, they grew louder, sharper, more insistent. Ryan realized with rising panic that the whispers were coming from inside his own head. Before he could react, she raised her hand, pointing to a narrow dirt path leading into the woods. Something compelled him forward. Fear and fascination wrestled within him, each step feeling heavier than the last. The rain didn't dampen his clothes, it soaked into his skin, chilling him to the bone. The path wound deeper into the forest. Trees arched over, creating dark tunnels where the rain barely penetrated. Shadows clung to the trunks, and the air smelled faintly of decay. Ryan's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He wanted to turn back, but the woman, silent, eternal, moved just ahead, guiding him into the unknown. After what felt like hours, they reached a clearing. An abandoned cabin stood at its center, the wood blackened by years of neglect. The door was slightly ajar, swaying in the wind, revealing an interior shrouded in darkness. Ryan hesitated, but the woman stepped inside without hesitation, as if daring him to follow. Inside, the cabin was worse than he imagined. The air was thick with the stench of rot and mildew. Faded furniture sat in decay, and the floorboards groaned underfoot. What caught Ryan's attention were the walls. They were covered in photographs, old black and white images of people, all staring directly at the camera, their expressions twisted in fear or agony. His stomach turned. In the corner of the room, a mirror reflected his own pale, frightened face, but something was wrong. Behind him, in the reflection, the woman stood. Her mouth stretched impossibly wide, her eyes dark voids, and the whispers now a deafening roar. "You are ours," a Ryan spun around. The cabin was empty. No woman, no photographs, just him and the oppressive darkness. Panic clawed at him, adrenaline fueling his legs as he bolted for the door. But the cabin seemed to shift around him. Every doorway led to another room, every wall stretched unnaturally, as if the building itself were alive and unwilling to let him leave. The whispers became words, taunting, accusing, promising pain. "You saw what you shouldn't. You can't escape. You belong to us now." Ryan's rational mind fractured. He stumbled into a room where a single chair faced the corner, restraints dangling loosely. He froze. Something told him this was where they had trapped victims before him. Footsteps echoed behind him, slow, deliberate, and impossibly close, yet invisible. Every instinct screamed to run, but he was trapped, surrounded by shifting walls and the ever closer whispers. His heart threatened to burst from his chest as shadows stretched toward him, coiling like serpents. Suddenly, a window appeared, showing the night outside the rain, the road, the distant glow of streetlights. With a surge of desperate courage, Ryan lunged through it, crashing onto the wet ground below. Pain shot through his body, but he scrambled to his feet and ran toward the road. When he reached his car, the rain had stopped. The forest was quiet, empty. The woman, the cabin, the whispers, they were gone. Shaking, soaked, and terrified, Ryan drove straight home, refusing to look back. He tried to rationalize it as sleep deprivation or hallucinations, yet deep inside, he knew the truth. Some things are not meant to be understood. In the following days, Ryan felt an awareness, an unseen presence following him. Every shadow at the corner of his eye, every whisper in the wind, reminded him that he was no longer alone. Sleep was a distant memory, replaced by dreams of the cabin, the photographs, the woman's void, like eyes. Weeks later, Ryan's friends noticed changes. He was jumpy, distracted, often muttering to himself. He refused to speak of what happened, yet when alone, he could hear her voice calling his name, faint but insistent. Ryan, don't resist. Months passed, and the encounters grew more vivid. Objects moved in his apartment. Cold drafts blew through closed windows, and whispers followed him in every darkened street. Friends stopped visiting, family worried. Every logical explanation failed, and Ryan realized he was trapped in a world layered over the normal one, a world that wanted him claimed. The final moment of terror came when he returned to the forest, drawn inexplicably back to the path. He found the clearing, but the cabin was no longer decayed. It gleamed under a silver moon, inviting, pristine. He felt a pull, irresistible, and stepped forward, knowing he could never resist again. The last thing he saw was her, standing at the door, smiling with eyes that swallowed the stars. Ryan was never seen again. Locals say if you drive that stretch of Oregon road on a rainy night, you might see a woman in white, guiding the unwary into the forest. Some hear whispers, faint at first, then loud, relentless, calling out your name. And for those unlucky enough to follow, they never return. Madison had always loved the thrill of the road. She and her friends, Mark and Jenna, frequently went on weekend trips, seeking abandoned sites, small towns, and forgotten highways. Their fascination with the eerie and abandoned had led them to the outskirts of Pennsylvania, where a rumor of a deserted asylum whispered through online forums. It was said to be a place where patients had vanished mysteriously decades ago, leaving behind only records and walls soaked with history and perhaps something darker. They arrived late in the afternoon, the sky heavy with gray clouds threatening rain. The asylum loomed ahead, a hulking silhouette of broken windows and crumbling brick. Ivy snaked up the walls, and the rusted gates creaked as Madison pushed them open. The air was thick with mildew and decay, yet a strange exhilaration coursed through them all. Inside, the hallways were narrow, lined with peeling paint and broken light fixtures. Their flashlights cut through the darkness, revealing remnants of the past torn medical records, rusty beds, and scratched walls that seemed to bear messages from long-gone patients. The further they went, the more oppressive the air became, as if the building itself resented their intrusion. "Do you hear that?" Jenna whispered, stopping in a hallway where the floorboards groaned underfoot. Mark frowned. "It's probably just the wind. This place is falling apart." But Madison had heard it too, a faint, almost imperceptible whisper, like someone calling her name. She shook her head, convincing herself it was her imagination. They entered what had once been the common area. Rusted chairs lay toppled across the floor, and the remnants of wheelchairs were scattered like discarded toys. Madison's flashlight flickered, casting long, distorted shadows. That's when she saw it, a figure crouched in the corner, motionless with its back to them. "Hello," she called out, her voice trembling. The figure didn't move. Her instincts screamed to leave, yet curiosity rooted her to the spot. As she stepped closer, the figure turned. Its face was pale, hollow-eyed, and twisted in a grotesque expression of pain. Its mouth opened in a silent scream, and Madison felt a cold rush of fear crawl up her spine. Jenna screamed, pulling her back. Mark shone his flashlight, but the figure was gone. Only the shadows remained, dancing unnaturally along the walls. The whispering grew louder, coming from the walls themselves. Leave or stay forever. They decided to explore further, despite the mounting fear. In the east wing, they discovered the patient rooms. Each door was slightly ajar, revealing beds stripped bare, personal items scattered across the floor. In one room, a diary lay open on the ground. Madison picked it up. The entries, written in shaky handwriting, detailed horrifying experiments conducted on patients' mind control attempts, sensory deprivation, and worse. The last entry ended abruptly with the words, "They're watching, always watching." Suddenly, the temperature dropped, their breath became visible in the air, and the whispering intensified. The trio realized the asylum was alive in a way they couldn't understand. Doors slammed shut simultaneously, and the floor beneath them shivered as if the building were shifting. Panic set in. They ran, but the hallways twisted and turned, making it impossible to find the entrance. Every corridor looked the same. Every doorway led to another identical room. Mark stopped abruptly. "We're not alone." From the darkness, figures emerged silent, pale, their movements jerky and unnatural. The trio tried to escape, but the figures blocked every exit. Madison felt one brush against her arm, its touch icy, paralyzing her. Jenna screamed as a shadow darted past her, leaving a cold imprint on her skin. The whispers had become voices, chanting, mocking, promising torment. In a desperate attempt, Madison remembered the diary. She shouted the last words aloud, hoping to draw the entity's attention. The chanting ceased for a moment, a hollow silence filling the halls. Then the floor beneath them gave way, plunging them into darkness. They landed in a basement, damp and suffocating. The air smelled of decay, and the walls seemed to close in. In the dim light, they saw the remnants of what had been the asylum's operating rooms. Rusted tables, shackles, and old surgical instruments littered the floor, and in the corner, a single chair faced the wall, straps dangling loosely. The whispers returned, louder than ever, surrounding them from all sides. Madison felt herself being drawn toward the chair, her body moving against her will. Mark and Jenna tried to pull her back, but unseen forces pushed them away. The chair's restraints tightened around Madison's wrists and ankles, binding her in place. Panic consumed her as the whispers became voices screaming in unison, "You belong here. You cannot leave. Forever." Suddenly, a flash of light illuminated the room. For a brief moment, the trio saw their reflection in a cracked mirror, 3 terrified faces, but behind them, more figures crowded the room, pressing closer with hollow eyes and twisted smiles. The light vanished, and with it, the figures disappeared. When Madison awoke, she was outside the asylum. Rain had begun to fall, soaking her to the bone. Mark and Jenna were nowhere to be seen. She ran to the road, frantically waving down passing cars. When she finally found help, authorities investigated the site, but the asylum was empty, no bodies, no traces of her friends, nothing. Locals spoke of the asylum in hushed tones, warning her never to return, yet no one could explain the disappearances that had plagued the place for decades. Madison never went back to abandoned sites. She moved towns, changed jobs, and avoided isolated places. Yet sometimes when she was alone, she could hear faint whispers echoing in her mind, "We are still here, waiting." And in her dreams, the pale figures reached out, calling her back to the asylum, promising she would never escape. Years later, she learned that others who had visited the asylum had similar experiences. Entire groups vanished, leaving behind only terrified survivors who spoke of shifting hallways, whispers, and unseen entities. The pattern was chillingly consistent. Anyone who entered the east wing of the asylum was never truly free, trapped in a realm layered over the normal world, where the asylum's dark residents could reach out and claim souls at will. Madison often wondered if her friends were still trapped, perhaps wandering the endless hallways of that otherworldly asylum. The thought haunted her, but she had no answers, only memories of a place where reality blurred with nightmare, where whispers promised doom, and where the past refused to stay buried. Lucas had always been fascinated with the unknown. Urban legends, local myths, and true crime stories were his obsession. So, when a friend told him about a stretch of road in rural Oregon that was infamous for disappearances and inexplicable events, he couldn't resist. The road was called Hollow Creek Drive, a winding path flanked by dense forests and misty wetlands, notorious for people vanishing without a trace. Many locals believed it was cursed. Lucas, armed with skepticism and curiosity, decided to see it for himself. It was late autumn when he drove up Hollow Creek Drive. The sky was overcast, and a cold wind rustled the dying leaves. The narrow road twisted unnaturally, and the trees seemed to lean in, their bare branches like skeletal fingers. Lucas's car headlights pierced the darkness, reflecting off wet pavement and revealing glimpses of fog that hung like a curtain over the road. At first, it was just the usual eeriness of a rural forest. But soon things began to feel wrong. His GPS stopped working. The road signs were inconsistent, distances didn't match, and landmarks appeared where they shouldn't. Then shadows began to flit along the tree-lined shapes that were too quick, too deliberate to be animals. He told himself it was fatigue, paranoia creeping in from too many horror documentaries. Lucas drove on, each turn of the wheel heightening the tension. That's when he saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the road. He slammed the brakes, heart pounding, but when he got out, there was nothing. Just the mist curling between the trees and the sound of his own ragged breathing. He got back into the car, telling himself it was a trick of the light. But then his radio crackled to life. It was static at first, then a faint voice calling his name, "Lucas, come closer." The voice was hollow, distant, yet chillingly familiar. He slammed the radio off, heart racing. The voice continued, whispering from nowhere, echoing in the cabin, growing louder with every mile. As he drove further, the fog thickened, wrapping around his car like a living entity. Trees seemed to shift, blocking his path, forcing him down an unfamiliar stretch. Lucas's pulse quickened as he realized he didn't recognize any of the turns. Panic set in, but something more sinister made him freeze, something moving in the fog, always just at the edge of his vision. Figures, faceless and black, following his car, keeping pace despite the twists and curves of the road. He remembered the local legend about Hollow Creek Drive. Travelers would see figures, shadows that weren't human, who would follow, sometimes attempting to lure drivers off the road. Those who left the path were never seen again. Rationality told him to keep driving straight, but fear clawed at his mind. Suddenly his car stalled. The engine died, lights flickering. The figures closed in, silent but palpable, pressing against the car doors like a cold, suffocating wave. Lucas grabbed his flashlight from the glove compartment and stepped out, only to be swallowed by the dense fog. He stumbled, calling for help, but the voice from the radio now surrounded him entirely. A chorus of whispers repeating his name in 1,000 variations, some pleading, some mocking. He tripped over roots and wet leaves, falling to the ground. And that's when he saw them, hundreds of shadowy faces in the mist, their eyes glowing faintly, mouths open as if screaming in silence. They moved in jerky, unnatural motions, circling him, whispering threats and promises of eternal entrapment. Each face seemed familiar, yet impossible, like they were drawn from his memories, twisted and deformed. Lucas ran blindly, trying to escape, but the road had changed. The path he had driven for miles now seemed endless, a labyrinth without exits. Every direction he turned led him deeper into the fog, deeper into the shadows. The figures followed, always just beyond reach, whispering his name, laughing softly, and beckoning him toward them. In desperation, Lucas remembered an old trick he had read about: confront the fear rather than flee. He stopped, shining his flashlight into the mist, demanding they leave him alone. The faces halted, frozen mid-motion, their glowing eyes flickering. The whispers paused, leaving an unnatural silence. He felt a weight lift slightly, but the relief was fleeting. From the shadows, a figure emerged, a tall, gaunt shape, its face featureless but radiating malice. It spoke without moving its lips, the voice resonating inside his skull. "You cannot leave, Lucas. This road keeps its own." The words were like ice, and he realized that no one who entered Hollow Creek Drive ever truly escaped. The road was alive, a sentient entity feeding on fear, trapping souls in its fog. Lucas felt his body grow heavy, his legs refusing to move. The shadows encircled him, closing in slowly. He screamed, thrashing, but it was useless. Then abruptly the fog lifted, and he found himself back in his car, engine running, headlights on, as if nothing had happened. His pulse was racing, sweat soaking his clothes. The road ahead seemed normal, straight, and empty. Shaken, Lucas drove off the stretch of Hollow Creek Drive, promising himself he would never return. He researched the area afterward, only to find countless reports of travelers experiencing the same thing. Time loops, strange shadows, whispers, and the terrifying sensation of being followed by unseen forces. People who ignored the warnings, who tried to confront the road, never came back. To this day, Lucas avoids rural roads, especially ones shrouded in mist or legend. But sometimes, late at night, he hears whispers in the wind, faintly calling his name. And in the distance, in the fog of an unfamiliar road, he sees shadows moving, flickering just at the edge of his vision. Hollow Creek Drive had not released him completely. It had marked him, and the memory, the terror, and the darkness follow him wherever he goes. Even years later, when recounting the story to friends, he notices the same shadows lurking in the corner of his eyes, the same whispers brushing past his ears. Hollow Creek Drive had become more than a road, it had become a part of him. A lingering horror that refused to fade. A constant reminder that some paths are never meant to be traveled alone. Mia never considered herself superstitious. She prided herself on being rational, grounded, and unafraid. But everything changed the night she decided to explore the abandoned Caldwell Hotel. Nestled on the outskirts of a forgotten town, the hotel had been shuttered for decades after a series of unexplained deaths. Locals whispered about the curse, claiming anyone who entered would encounter visions of the dead or worse, never leave at all. Mia, an amateur photographer and thrill seeker, dismissed these warnings. She saw it as an opportunity to capture eerie photos for her portfolio. It was a cold, foggy evening when Mia arrived at the hotel. The air was thick with mildew, and the wind carried whispers that seemed almost intelligible. The building loomed like a decaying monument, its windows dark and hollow, the entrance boarded but partially broken. She stepped inside, flashlight in hand, immediately greeted by the smell of rot and dust. Her footsteps echoed through the empty halls, bouncing off walls lined with peeling wallpaper and broken chandeliers. The lobby was a relic frozen in time. Dust, covered furniture, shattered glass, and debris littered the floor. But what caught her eye was the grand staircase, its ornate railing still intact, leading to the upper floors where the bedrooms remained untouched. Mia felt a chill that wasn't from the cold air, a sensation of being watched by unseen eyes. She raised her camera, trying to focus on the details, but the images appeared distorted, shadows stretching in unnatural ways, faces forming where none existed. As she explored, she noticed a series of paintings along the corridor, portraits of previous guests, or so the plaque claimed, but their faces were obscured, smeared, and unrecognizable. One painting in particular drew her closer, a family of 3, smiling, yet their eyes seemed hollow, accusing. Mia felt a sudden pressure in the air, like the room itself was holding its breath. She took a photo and the camera screen flickered. When she glanced at the image, the family in the painting was gone, replaced by a dark silhouette standing behind her. She spun around, but the hall was empty. Her heartbeat quickened as she ascended the staircase. The upper floors were colder, the darkness heavier. Mia's flashlight illuminated the doors, most hanging off their hinges, revealing decayed interiors. In one room, she noticed a mirror, cracked but still reflective. As she looked into it, she didn't see her own reflection. Instead, she saw a woman standing behind her, pale, eyes sunken, mouth twisted into a silent scream. Mia whirled around empty. Her flashlight flickered, shadows dancing across the walls, forming shapes that mimicked her movements. The hotel seemed alive, responding to her presence. Doors slammed in distant hallways, whispers echoed through the corridors, calling her name in distorted tones. Panic clawed at her mind, but curiosity urged her on. She entered a large ballroom. The ceiling collapsed in places, letting in streaks of moonlight. The floor was littered with old furniture and shattered mirrors. As she explored, she felt something brush past her leg, a cold, intangible touch. She froze, breath caught in her throat. Suddenly, music began to play. Faint at first, a haunting piano melody that grew louder, echoing through the empty ballroom. Mia's flashlight flickered wildly, then died. She was plunged into darkness, only the music guiding her. It wasn't random, it was deliberate, each note dragging her deeper into the room. Shadows coalesced in the corners, forming figures that moved in time with the melody. They reached out, faceless hands extending toward her. Desperate, Mia fumbled for her camera, hoping the flash would dispel whatever haunted the room. She snapped a photo, and the room was illuminated briefly. The figures were gone, replaced by hundreds of eyes staring from the broken mirrors, following her every move. The music stopped suddenly, leaving an oppressive silence. Then a whisper, almost a sigh, filled the room. "You shouldn't be here." She ran toward the exit, doors slamming shut in her path. Each hallway twisted unnaturally, rooms appearing where there shouldn't be any, hallways looping back on themselves. Panic surged as she realized the building was disorienting her, reshaping itself like a maze. The exit she remembered was gone. The whispers grew louder, voices overlapping, calling her name, mocking her fear. In a desperate bid, Mia hid in a small storage closet, curling up in the dark. She held her breath as shadows moved past the door, listening to the floorboards creak under invisible weight. Time seemed to stretch endlessly. Hours, minutes, she couldn't tell. Then she heard it. A soft, deliberate tapping on the door, rhythmic, like someone counting off her remaining seconds. Mia's phone buzzed. She hadn't realized it was still on, and the screen illuminated the closet with a faint glow. A notification popped up, a message from an unknown number, "We see you." Her blood ran cold. The tapping grew louder, now accompanied by scraping noises, as if someone or something was trying to force the door open. She clutched her camera like a talisman, the only connection to reality. The door burst open. Mia screamed, but there was no figure. Just the oppressive darkness, moving around her, closing in. She bolted, blindly running through twisting corridors, feeling cold fingers brush against her skin. She stumbled into the grand lobby, now completely different from before walls had decayed further. The chandeliers hung precariously, the air thick with the stench of decay. She found the front door. It should have been locked or boarded, but it opened easily. Mia didn't hesitate. She ran through the foggy night, never looking back until she reached her car. She sped away, the hotel disappearing in the mist as if it had never existed. Back home, Mia reviewed her photos. Every image taken inside the Caldwell Hotel was distorted, faces blurred into grotesque forms, shadows moving independently of light sources. One photo stood out, a full-length shot of the ballroom, where in the center, a figure was clearly visible, holding a camera that mirrored her own. But the figure's face was hollow, its expression impossible to read. The experience left her shaken. Friends and family dismissed her story as imagination, or the result of overactive nerves. But Mia knew the truth. The Caldwell Hotel was alive, aware, and hungry for attention. It had tested her, toyed with her, and allowed her to escape, but it hadn't forgotten. She could still hear the faint echoes of piano music late at night, shadows lingering at the edges of her vision. Mia never returned to abandoned places, never tempted fate again. Yet sometimes her camera would capture fleeting images in the corner of photos, shapes that weren't there, shadows that seemed to move toward the lens. And she knew, deep down, that the Caldwell Hotel had left a part of itself inside her. A reminder that curiosity in the wrong place can awaken horrors that never truly sleep. Ethan had always been a skeptic, the type who laughed at ghost stories and cursed legends. But a dare from his friends led him to the remote Pine Hollow Forest, a stretch of woods infamous for disappearances and unexplained phenomena. The locals avoided it, citing strange lights, whispering winds, and shadows that moved against the flow of nature. Ethan, fueled by bravado, insisted that nothing in those woods could scare him. The group set out at dusk, carrying backpacks, flashlights, and a sense of excitement. The forest was dense, its towering pines blocking much of the fading light. As night fell, the woods took on a different character. The rustling of leaves sounded unnatural, almost like murmured conversations. Ethan laughed nervously, a attributing it to the wind, but a knot of unease tightened in his stomach. After several hours of hiking, they stumbled upon an abandoned cabin, its walls covered in moss and decay. Curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to explore it. The cabin seemed normal at first glance, nothing more than an old hunting lodge left to the elements. But inside, the air was suffocating, thick with a smell that was part rot, part iron. The floorboards groaned under their weight, echoing through the tiny space. Ethan noticed scratches on the walls, symbols he didn't recognize. They were crude, almost frantic, and seemed to pulse under the flashlight's glow. His friends laughed it off, thinking it was some kind of prank by teenagers or a warning scrawled decades ago. But as Ethan ran his fingers over one of the marks, a chill raced up his spine. The air shifted, growing colder, heavier. Whispers began to echo in the corners of the cabin, too low to understand, yet impossible to ignore. Then the temperature dropped drastically. Their breath was visible, fogging the air inside the cabin. Shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls, growing longer and darker as if alive. One friend, Jason, claimed he saw someone peeking through a broken window pane, gaunt, with eyes like black pits. When the group turned to look, the figure vanished. Panic began to set in. Ethan tried to maintain composure, insisting it was a trick of the light, that fear was playing games on their minds. But he felt it too, the oppressive presence pressing on them, almost tangible, a force that made their limbs heavy and their hearts pound. They decided to leave, but as soon as they stepped outside, the forest seemed different. The path they had followed was gone, replaced by thick undergrowth and shadows that moved in impossible directions. The moonlight barely penetrated the dense canopy, casting distorted shapes on the ground. Every turn they took led them back to the same cabin, as though the forest itself was bending space, keeping them trapped. Hours passed, though it felt like minutes. The whispers grew louder, now almost intelligible. Words, though garbled, carried threats and promises of doom. Ethan's flashlight flickered and died, plunging them into complete darkness. Panic erupted among the group. They ran blindly, crashing through underbrush, their screams swallowed by the night. But the forest was not passive. It responded, closing off exits, guiding them back to the cabin again and again. Exhausted and terrified, they found themselves in a small clearing. In the center stood a tree unlike any other, gnarled and twisted, with branches resembling grasping hands. Its bark seemed to pulse faintly, like a heartbeat, and shadows moved along it independently of any light source. A low humming sound emanated from the tree, vibrating through the ground and into their bones. Ethan approached it cautiously, drawn despite his terror, and noticed something etched into the trunk. Names, hundreds of them, carved crudely but with purpose. Among them, fresh scratches. Ethan recognized one of his friend's jackets caught on a branch. Before he could warn them, a figure appeared in the shadows, pale, emaciated, with eyes that glowed faintly in the darkness. It moved unnaturally, limbs bending at impossible angles. Ethan froze, paralyzed by fear. The figure spoke, a voice like gravel and wind. "You shouldn't have come." The friends scattered, running in different directions, but the forest seemed to stretch infinitely, paths looping impossibly. Ethan stumbled, scraping his hands and knees along roots and rocks, but every direction led him back to the clearing and the tree. The pale figure was always there, just at the edge of his vision, watching, patient. Hours or maybe days passed. Time lost all meaning. Hunger and thirst gnawed at them, but fear was the only thing keeping them alive. Ethan tried to call for help, but his phone had no signal, and the battery seemed to drain unnaturally fast. Each time he shone a flashlight, shadows danced in ways that defied physics, sometimes forming human shapes, sometimes grotesque parodies of life. Finally, in a moment of desperate clarity, Ethan remembered something an old local had told him. If you hear the whispers, don't answer. Keep moving. Don't look back. He focused on the sound of the wind through the trees and ran blindly, ignoring the whispers, ignoring the shadows. By the time dawn broke, Ethan emerged from the forest alone, dirty, bruised, and utterly exhausted. The cabin and the twisted tree were gone, leaving only normal forest under the morning light. It was as if the horrors of the night had never existed, but he knew they had. Every instinct screamed that something had followed him out, something that might come again. Back in town, he tried to tell his story. Authorities dismissed it, friends doubted it, and locals offered vague warnings about the hollow. But Ethan knew what he had seen. What he had felt, the forest was alive, aware, and malevolent. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of Pine Hollow, it waited, ready for the next intruder foolish enough to ignore its warnings. Even now, months later, Ethan hears whispers in the wind, glimpses shadows moving in the corner of his vision, and occasionally finds scratches on his walls that weren't there before. The forest didn't let him go entirely. It left a mark, a reminder that some places are meant to be avoided, no matter how brave or foolish you believe yourself to be. Months passed, but the memories of Pine Hollow refused to fade. Ethan moved to a new city, hoping to escape the forest's grip. He rented a small apartment on the edge of town, believing that distance would sever the connection. Yet the whispers never fully left him. At first, they were faint, easy to dismiss as his imagination, but gradually, they became more persistent, more insistent. Late at night, he would hear them weaving through the walls of his apartment, soft at first, like the sighing of old pipes, but then sharper, forming words he could almost understand. He would wake in the middle of the night to shadows crawling along the ceiling, stretching impossibly long, forming shapes that defied reason. Objects in his apartment would shift positions subtly, only noticeable when he looked twice. He tried to tell himself it was stress, paranoia, but deep down, he knew Pine Hollow had left its mark. One evening, Ethan was browsing online, researching strange disappearances and paranormal encounters, when he stumbled upon a forum discussing Pine Hollow Forest. He expected skepticism, jokes, or urban legends, but instead, he found accounts eerily similar to his own experience. People described the same twisted tree, the same whispering shadows, the impossible loops through the forest. Some claimed they had escaped, others were never seen again. One post marked urgent warned readers, if you hear whispers, do not follow them. If the shadows move, do not look. They are patient, and they collect what is theirs. That night, Ethan awoke to a whisper that was undeniably real. It came from the corner of his bedroom, close enough to feel on his skin. The words were chillingly clear. You can't escape. We know where you are. Panic surged through him. He turned on the lights, nothing. He searched the apartment, every room, every closet, every shadowed corner, but found no one. Sleep became impossible. Even in daylight, he felt eyes on him, subtle movements in the corners of his vision. Friends noticed changes in his behavior. He was jittery, hyper, aware, and prone to sudden outbursts of fear. But when asked what was wrong, he simply shook his head. How could he explain a forest that reached out, that followed, that refused to let go? Weeks later, he received a package with no return address. Inside was a small, gnarled piece of wood, twisted like the branches of the tree he had seen in Pine Hollow. Carved into it were names, his friends' names, and then his own. Panic turned to terror. The forest, or whatever force lived there, had found a way to reach him. The whispers became constant now, a relentless drone that followed him through every waking moment. Desperation drove Ethan to seek help from experts, paranormal investigators, psychics, and folklore historians. Each one listened, skeptical at first, but some began to notice the pattern. Strange electromagnetic readings, unusual temperature drops, and inexplicable phenomena seemed to follow him. A psychic even described a resonance around him, like a tether connecting him to something malevolent. The experts warned him. The forest was more than trees and soil. It was alive, aware, and it had claimed him as its own. Ethan tried to fight back. He burned sage, performed rituals, even attempted to return to Pine Hollow in a desperate hope of confronting whatever haunted him. Each attempt failed. The forest itself seemed to anticipate him, shifting paths, hiding trails, and whispering threats that froze him in place. Every step inside Pine Hollow was a reminder that the forest did not forgive, and it did not forget. At one point, he began seeing figures in the city, shadowy silhouettes that mimicked the forest's entities. They appeared at the edge of his vision, vanished when looked at directly, and occasionally moved with unnatural speed. Sleep became fragmented, nightmares blended with reality, and he started recording audio at night to capture the whispers. Playbacks revealed voices chanting his name, counting down, or warning him of things he could not understand. Ethan's life became a careful balancing act of survival, evasion, and denial. Yet the forest's influence was insidious. He would wake with scratches on his skin, faint marks in shapes reminiscent of Pine Hollow's symbols. Items would disappear and reappear, always in the same twisted, unnatural manner. He realized the forest was not confined to the woods it had followed him, adapting, waiting, feeding on fear and uncertainty. One evening, Ethan received another cryptic message this time, carved into the wooden door of his apartment. "Time is short. We are patient, but you will not outrun us forever." It was unmistakable. The handwriting was jagged, chaotic, echoing the scratches he had seen in the cabin. Terror gripped him like an iron fist, yet he knew there was no running left, no hiding that would last. Friends and family began to notice changes in him, but they didn't understand. He had gone from skeptical, brave, and rational to haunted, paranoid, and withdrawn. Conversations would sometimes stop mid-sentence when he stared at shadows that weren't there or perhaps were. Small things became unbearable, a draft, a creak in the floor, a fleeting glimpse of movement. He began to isolate himself, afraid of dragging others into the forest's reach. Then one night, a new whisper broke the monotony. "It is time." The voice was louder, commanding, filling the room like a physical presence. Ethan tried to flee, but the apartment seemed to constrict, walls leaning inward, shadows stretching to meet him. Doors refused to open. Windows became opaque. Panic surged to a crescendo as the forest, this presence, this malevolent force, manifested fully. Ethan felt an overwhelming pull, a compulsion to follow the shadows. He tried to resist, but his body moved against his will, drawn into the darkness that now seemed to fill every corner of his life. The whispers became a chant, repeating names, counting down, calling him back to the forest, back to Pine Hollow, back to the place where fear had first claimed him. His last conscious thought was of the twisted tree, the carved names, the branches that reached for him in the clearing. The shadows closed in, the whispers became deafening, and then silence, thick, complete, eternal. Weeks later, neighbors reported a faint smell of decay and noticed the apartment abandoned, untouched yet somehow disturbed. Ethan was gone. No trace remained, save for a small gnarled piece of wood left in the corner of the empty room, etched with one new name, his. And somewhere deep in the city, shadows moved independently, whispering, waiting, patient as ever. The forest had followed him. It always does, and it will wait for the next intruder, the next skeptic, the next brave or foolish soul willing to ignore the warnings. Pine Hollow is alive, aware, and hungry. And if you ever hear whispers in the dark, shadows moving against the light, or see scratches forming where none existed before, know this. It's already too late. Fear is not a warning. It's a sign that something unseen is watching, calculating, and waiting. Some places are not meant to be entered. Some stories are not meant to be told, and some forests, never let go,